I am proud. I'm very proud of the literature we have produced so far, but there are a few gaps on the shelf of Guyanese literature. Welcome to Oral Tradition and another adventure in Guyanese literature. Let's also welcome a Guyanese-born Canadian author of, and I'm quoting, author of diverse, inclusive, festive children literature. Yolanda, welcome to the program Oral Tradition.
Good morning, and thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah. Well, I should say welcome home.
Welcome home. Yeah.
And there's so
I
much to
felt
talk
like I never heard that.
and there's so much to talk about. Black cake, um, cook up rice, roti curry,
Sorrel.
sorrel, hot cross buns.
Yes.
Yeah, early we've got a wonderful literature. Although it's novel to the world, Guyanese and Caribbean literature, although it's still a novelty, we've produced some significant writers working in all genres. But there's a genre that is still being thin on the shelf, and that is writing for children, children literature. And this is where you come into the picture. Your first publication, the book of poem, there's a subtitle about getting into your mind. And this is one of the
Yes.
reasons for this program, Oral Edition. Bringing the writer, bringing the author to a Chinese public and a wider public, getting into your head. Who is Yolanda Marshall? Where were you born? Where you grew up? Your formative days. Tell us something about that before we get into your books.
Yes. So I'm Yolanda T. Marshall. Marshall stands for Tatiana Marshall. And I was born in Georgetown, Guyana. And to be specific, as my dad, who is Herbert Marshall, a very popular guitarist in Guyana, jazz musician. Many of you are familiar with him. He told me that when I was born, my mom and himself, who were married, were living in Kitty, Campbellville. I grew up a lot of my years in Albertown, between Albertown, Georgetown, and in North Rhine Valley. After the divorce of my parents, I became what would be considered a barrel child
Ah,
because my primary caregiver, who would have been my mom, moved to Canada with the majority of her family to start a life. And we were left with like my dad's family and sometimes with hers. And by the age of 14, I migrated to Canada permanently. I mean, prior to that, I visited Canada at 1 years old. I was pretty young. So my mom traveled with us here and there. But my mom traveled a lot in my childhood. She was missing for a few chunks of it. She studied in India with a program through the Guyanese government. And then, yeah, she migrated to Canada, and here I am. So I, the majority of my childhood would be growing up in Guyana. And my dad's side of the family are very creative. I know growing up or being in the home with my grandparents, his parents, and my grandfather's side, especially my dad's side, they're Bajans, right? From Barbados. And most of them actually in home, I would say 99% of them played the guitar or they sang, right? An instrument, and they started playing at 8 years old too. My dad would give me the guitar. I was a part of a folk group in Central High School. I went to St. Margaret's Primary School, then I went to Central High School. Central High School, I would join the arts club. I was in a folk group as the guitarist. My dad's a guitarist, so everything musical. The reading, it would be my dad's side. I remember stepping into their home and they had so many books. The entire home smelled like books for some reason. But many of them were educators, right? The Marshalls, they were educators. I was told that my great grandmother started Drusilla Marshall. She was a owner of a school. My aunts were educators. My grandmother were educators. So there were many books. There was music, and you would see that in my writing. I always have a way of incorporating music. And there was always food in the homes. You know, my grandmother was a housewife. She cooked every day. Uh, but art just surrounded me in many ways. And in schools, I would join a dance group, you know. At one point, I won third in a fashion model contest. Like, I would just sign up for whatever.
But
But that's my life.
Yeah. What wonderful, wonderful childhood. Food, music, culture, books. Wonderful childhood. Well, if we should go into your book now. We should go into your book and see some of those things in your formative days. The food you talk about, the music you talk about coming out in the book. Why did you want to share these things? There must be a reason why you want to share these things. And, but we must also not diminish the role played by the illustrators, which we'll talk about in a little while. The illustrators, they've got to understand the story, the writing, to come up with the illustrations. And also, we must not forget the agents or the publishing houses. Like one of the publishing houses is named Chalkboard, which sounds a bit educational. So there's a bit of education inside here. Also, there are lots of influences in your work. Guyana, Caribbean, African connections and influences, which when we open your books, we see these things, the jollof rice, the cook-up pepper pot, and sorrel. So, but the one that goes into your mind, your first book of poem, um, talk about that.
I mentioned earlier, I started writing poems at a young age. At During my later years in university at the University of Toronto, I'd accumulated, of course, like I don't know, 1,000 poems or more, hundreds of poems, enough to make a book. And I remember going to Lorna Goodison. She's an author, a Jamaican author that lives in Canada and in the U.S. too. She was also a professor at the University of Toronto, and she was doing a book launch. And I remember attending that book launch, and I felt so inspired. And the message she offered, you know, was being proud of your heritage and your culture and your art and such. And I felt like, yeah, like I love writing. I have this work already. So I really should do a book. I should publish a book. And I did. At that point, I self-published a book. And that means you pay for everything to have it published. It didn't cost me a lot, but I did. And the strong poem in that was called Obaifo. And Obaifo was about a woman.
Yeah, who likes food?
Like, yeah, who likes food? Like if we think of like a old hide or something, you know? And I thought I grew up with all these mythical characters as a tradition. It's tradition. And we talk about it. We talk about this like, oh, this, oh, yeah, this, oh, like this and this. We this is a part of our culture, especially in Guyana. I grew up with this, and I would read a lot and I do research, like, where did this mythical character comes from? Like, what is, and you read about the Olhai, you read about Obaifo. It's a vampire
There is a
character.
misconception here about Obia. It is a
Yes.
religion. So perhaps you can dispel that
Yes.
Obaifo
Yes.
before we go on, so we can understand where we
Yes.
come from.
And that is where the story comes, because we'll talk about this growing up, especially as a kid. But Obaifo, of course, is a traditional African character, and it's connected to a religion. Obeah itself is a religion. Afro-Caribbeans or Africans were punished for celebrating their culture and their religions, and they were forced into Christianity. And that is a fact. There are many proof of that. Colonialism has taught us to hate ourselves and our traditions. We came from African tribes, hundreds, maybe even thousands, right? And hundreds of languages. And they had their own structure of beliefs that we were taught that was so bad. And I remember growing up, and there was this woman, they call her the Obeah woman, would beat the comfort drums, and I would be there and I'll be dancing and combing my hair. And I had no problem with this. And my grandmother would be having a hissy fit at the back. Come inside the house. What are you doing? You're going to catch spirits in your hair. And I never understand. I'm like, this woman is doing and no one anything. What is there to fear? This fear in your head is due to colonialism. But that's how I wrote the poem, to talk about this woman where, she has her baggage, she has her spells, and she has Papa Brown who's dead, and she leaves food out for her. Many Guyanese people leave food out on Old Year's night. We do it casually. Yeah. Right? We go here, we leave food out for the spirits. Oh, my friend, that's a part of spiritualism.
Libation sometimes, or very often, for the spirit.
Yes. We give thanks to our ancestors.
There's a lot more in common than differences between our cultures and our identities and our ethnicity. Yes. There is a lot.
Yes, there's a lot. Yeah. There is a lot. And that poem, the poem pretty much just, shows that. And it's just, it's kind of like, fine, if you're afraid of her, be afraid, because it ends with, that's my shadow catching auntie. So it really told of that, the tales we're told as a kid to scare us, but it's reality. This is a real person, and people talking and they're scared and whatnot. But yeah, I was never afraid of it. I just never was. And I just wanted to tell that fun poem and show the depth of my my mind. The book is called Into the Mind of Miss Rogers. I was like, okay, let's talk about it.
Yeah. That's what I said. Very often I like to go into the mind of the writer, so who is ever watching or listening will know where we're coming from, how it realize, where these things are coming from. Many things they're coming from the depth of our soul, you know what I mean?
Yes.
And it doesn't take very much to trigger these memories and these feelings. Yeah.
Yes.
All right, let's go. And
I love that.
Yeah. Okay. Before we go into another book, I'd like to focus on your advocacy. Your advocacy for your podcast, Caribbean Stories. You're a columnist also for It Corner. Talk about those two that I know about, and what other advocacy you do for advocacy you do for literature and writing.
Yes.
I mean, something like what I'm doing. Yeah.
Pretty much what I'm doing is pretty much a protest, in a sense, to society, to say that our kids deserve to be seen. And if you don't make it happen, then I want to make sure that my time on earth and in this generation, that I can impact as many kids as I can and get the work done. And I've been ever so lucky to work hard and start by myself. And now I'm agented author, and I'm traditionally published. Traditional publishing means I don't pay to be published. I get paid for my story. I write, there's a contract legal deal. My agent actually sells my work to publishers to get it done.
Good for you.
And and writing stories like mine that was traditionally excluded from the publishing world, especially in Canada. And I'm not watering it down. I mean, Does watered down pepper pot taste good? No. They have to get the richness and the flavor. I want them to read the pages and you just taste it, you know. I want their children to like eat it all up. So getting myself into events and literacy events to showcase my culture in my book. But I know I'm telling stories that is real. This is real. My son lives this story. My friends live this story. And when I talk about the Caribbean, I'm not just talking about Afro-Caribbean. It's Indo-Caribbean, Asian. Everyone is in there because when I look at my friends and my family, we're diverse, right? So yeah, I want to make sure that it's seen, and that's how I advocate for literature.